Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 20 through 33, we hear these words. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to tell Andrew, and Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must also follow me. And where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason that I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said that it thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit and not mine. Now is the time of judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. I invite you to pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Do you remember when you learned how to drive? According to a few folks, some of us haven't learned yet. But you remember when you learned how to drive, right? Now, in those days, it was a little different, right, for us old people. Some of you, some of you didn't have to take driver's ed, right, or do that stuff. You just kind of started driving, right? I started driving when I was really young. My dad had a Ford Falcon. You know what a Ford Falcon is? Man, it's a great car. It had 3-speed on the column. Y'all know how to drive 3-speed on the column? Yeah. On the column, Joe, not on the floor. It's a little harder on the column. You got to figure that out, right? How to get it in reverse. I learned how to drive on that baby blue Ford Falcon. But in those days, it wasn't that big a deal, right? But if you got your permit, you had to ride with your parents, right? Now, there's something about that being trained how to drive that sometimes makes you nervous, right? If you're the kid, you get nervous. If you're the parent, you get nervous. Where did Pete go? Pete, if you're driving with Lexi, you might get really nervous. You ought to have Pete tell you the story about driving with Lexi a couple days ago. Mercy. He told her to take the curve at 20. She probably should have taken it at 5. But, you know, you get nervous when you're learning how to drive, right? But they give you all these rules when you're starting to drive, right? I remember when Dustin and Kelsey started to drive, they go to driver's training, and you got to have your hands at 3 and 9, right? And you have to do certain things, and when you turn from one lane to the next, you turn in the first available lane, right? They give you all these rules, and when you're the permitted driver, you're really careful, and you follow the rules, and you drive the speed limit. And then when you get your license, you don't. And you just have to follow all the rules, right? Because you want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And these days, you drive with AAA or somebody, right? And you drive with the instructor, and he's got to pass you to make sure you do all those things right. And you have the law and the knowledge in your head, right? And you can do all the right things. And then you go to take your test, and there are certain things they make you do. You've got to do that maneuverability thing. I'd have rather done that than parallel park. Y'all had the parallel park, right?
Yeah.
Some of you. I'd rather do the maneuverability than parallel park. But in those days, they made you parallel park, and you had to do all those things. And then you get your license, and then you're on your own. Now, if you drive the bus, if you're like Rod and myself, you get your bus license, you have to, Rod had to parallel park that bus, didn't you? Can you imagine that? That bus is 38 feet long. I Lansing, when I took my bus test, had to back the bus into a loading dock. That didn't make any sense to me, because I don't make you all jump out the back. But you have to do all these certain things, and they take you on the driving test, and you have to go across railroad tracks, and you have all that knowledge. And when you're taking your bus test, you're really conscientious, right? Except when you get back to the testing station, there is a curb there. Yeah. You don't want to hit the curb. If you hit the curb, you fail. Right, Ron?
Yep.
Yeah. So I was taking my bus test. I'll never forget. We were driving along. We were on 33 going under 75. And we were buzzing right along. And he said, "So, Jim, how tall did it say that bridge was?" And I'm driving along, and I looked in the mirror and said, "No clue," because I didn't even see it. I'm not sure it's there. Is it there, Ron? I didn't think so. But that's the only thing I missed on my test, and I got my bus driver's license. But you have to be you're conscientious, right? You do all the right things, and take your time and do all the right things, because you want to pass the test. And all of that knowledge that you get from a driving instructor, from your parents or your grandparents, the book knowledge that you get when you pass the test, you sit in front of the computer, and have to get all the signs right. You know, all the knowledge of all of that. But when does that knowledge become something more than knowledge? It's when you're by yourself, right? So when Dustin and Kelsey got their license, I'll never forget. Dustin passed his driving test. He had an F-150. We were getting new tires on it. He passed the test. We go out the best one tire. He throws his golf clubs in the back. His license wasn't dry yet. And zoom, away he goes. Kelsey passed her driver's test. Do you remember? We got home. She was driving a 1996 green Ford Taurus called the Green Hornet. She passed her test. We got home. She went upstairs, changed her clothes. Her license wasn't dry yet. She jumped in that Taurus and went to the fair. As her mom and I stood there in the driveway going, "Oh gosh." I remember my first time by myself. You all remember? We had a Chevy pickup. We actually had a Chevy in our garage. I'm not sure why that was. This old Chevy pickup. And it was a 3-speed on the column, Joe.
So was mine.
And I got my license, and I didn't go within the first couple hours, but it might have been a day later. I'll never forget. Suddenly, that knowledge that's in your head, right? Now, you're in the car all by yourself. Who's telling you what to do? Nobody, right? No one's getting on you. Nobody's telling you to slow down. Nobody's telling you to get your turn signal on or none of that stuff, right? Suddenly, that knowledge that's in your head, you must put into practice. Dustin and I took a motorcycle safety course down in Troy, and it was really good. We went 3 nights, and we rode the motorcycles all 3 nights. We had a great time. We passed our test in the rain, but you had to pass the test. And if you passed the test there, you didn't have to take the test at the DMV. They gave you a little certificate. So you had to do this figure 8 thing, you know? You ever done a figure 8 on a motorcycle? It's not an easy thing to do. And you have to make the curves in a certain way, and they're testing you all the way. And the entire time we're in this class, Dustin's doing really well. And every time they wanted something demonstrated, the instructor would say, "Dustin, come demonstrate that for us." He was making me ill. Because everybody thought he was so great at riding a motorcycle. When we got done with our test, guess who got a perfect score? Me. Guess who didn't get a perfect score? Dustin. Yeah. But there's something to be said then when you get your license on your motorcycle and you have all that knowledge in your head, right? And all the things they tell you. But when it becomes personal, is when you have to put it into practice. That's what Jeremiah says to us. So if you go back and think about the text that Devin read to us in Jeremiah, the people of Israel had been taken captive by the Babylonians. The temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. King Zedekiah had been taken in chains away. All that they knew and understood about their life and their history and their knowledge and their faith and their God, all that they knew from way back in Egypt, this covenant that God established with them to bring them to the promised land, all this that they knew, all this law that had been written on the 10 Commandments that had been put in the Ark of the Covenant, all this stuff that they could recite, was gone. And they were in captivity. And it seemed hopeless. As a matter of fact, if you go back and read these other chapters of Jeremiah, in the entire book of Jeremiah, this prophet is wailing at the people of Israel to get their lives straight, to figure it out, to turn back to God. But according to Jeremiah, they were unfaithful. They couldn't figure it out. You see, for the people of Israel, they had it up here. They knew the law. What was the law in those days? The Ten Commandments, right? They were written on the stone. And they were there in the Ark of the Covenant. Who could go in and see the Ark of the Covenant? The high priest, right? Only the high priest, and only once a year, right? Could the high priest go in where the Ark of the Covenant was. It was as if this law of God, what they had been taught in all their training, seemed a far way off. They couldn't touch it. It was unattainable. And it was all in their head. And there they were, taken captive, and they were slaves again. And hope was cut off. But venture to guess there are places in our world today where it seems hope is cut off. Can you imagine being in places like Yemen and other places where devastation just reigns and hope must seem cut off? That's how the people felt. But then Jeremiah, in the midst of all of this challenge of getting their life straight, trying to get them to come back to the law, gets this new word from God. And this, friends, is a powerful word. To hear what it says, these words change lives and change the future of the people of Israel. Hear again what God says. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers. The old covenant was what? To go from the promised land, from Egypt to the promised land, right? That was the old covenant. They had gotten there. It won't be like that covenant, God says. But I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. This is the covenant, the new covenant, I will make with the house of Israel. Hear what he says. All of this knowledge, all that they knew, all that they understood, all this head knowledge about who God was suddenly going to change. Hear this good news. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. God establishes a new covenant. So instead of this relationship with God that's broken, instead of this law that seems unattainable, instead of this knowledge that's only in their head and they don't